In this episode of Podcast Tactics, veteran podcaster Dan Moyle generously shares tips and tricks for launching and growing podcasts that amplify people's stories while causing a positive impact in the world. I'm James, the host of Podcast Tactics. If you want to keep learning about podcasting, get inspired, and stay motivated, join the mailing list at podcasttactics.com. Thanks for listening. Let's get into it. Joining me at the mic is veteran podcaster Dan Moyle in the Kalamazoo, Michigan area.
Yes, sir. Hi.
Dan, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
James, it's my pleasure, man. Thanks for making time for me.
Well, let's dive right in. Let's talk about your podcast. What is the name of it and what's it all about?
Yeah, so I launched the Storytellers Network a couple of years ago, and I have interviewed more than 100 different storytellers in some form or fashion. It could be writers of books. It could be social media storytellers. It could be video creators. I've interviewed marketing professionals. So each season that I produced had a different kind of flavor. And I was all about asking them about their story, why they tell stories, how they tell them, not necessarily like a tactical, if you want to have a tactical storytellers podcast, maybe listen to like Donald Miller, right? Or somebody like that. But mine was more the stories behind the storytellers. And it was incredible.
What were the origins for that show? How did that come to be for you?
Yeah. So at the time, I was working for a company that offered a service to help business owners, entrepreneurs, authors get on podcasts as guests. The whole idea was, instead of creating guest blog articles that, nobody seems to read anymore, it was be a guest on a podcast and make sure that they're linking back to your website. So you get the content, you get to be a subject matter expert, you get the links back to your website, you get the social promotion, et cetera, et cetera. And so we did that. Now, at the time, we didn't have a podcast of our own as a podcast interview marketing agency, which was fine. We didn't have to have that necessarily. But I got so enthralled by speaking with soon-to-be guests. I was our marketing person, and I also did our onboarding of new clients. And I grew fascinated with this idea of podcasting. I went to a couple of events like PodFest and Podcast Movement, met a bunch of podcasters, and I thought, man, how cool would it be if I was interviewing people who might be great guests for us someday, like prospects, right? And then learning from them also and telling stories and I guess that'd be great. And my boss at the time said, I love the idea, but it's a little bit big picture. We want to focus on more tactical stuff right now. I said, okay, fine. Can I still do it on my own though? He said, oh yeah, sure. It's your idea. Go for it. So I was like, all right, what the heck?
Yeah.
So I did it on my own. It's been a hobby. That was back in 2018 that I launched that. Started working on it in 17. And, as you know, James, you spend all the time getting things ready and doing the recording and starting to produce it, et cetera, et cetera. But I launched it in 2018, and that was the origin.
Okay. And prior to that, had you had any experience with podcasting, putting on a show, or was this a new endeavor for you entirely? Yeah,
great question. I spent almost a decade in TV news as a producer of a morning show. And so I did a lot of writing. I also, before the morning show, in that same TV newsroom, I was a multimedia news producer. And basically that meant I got to take the recordings of area radio DJs and then our news people and put them together into this like audio format that would go on the radio station at the time. So this was back in probably 2012, maybe 2013.
Okay.
And I thought, man, there's this new thing called a podcast that this could be used for. Like, all I'm doing is creating an audio file, right? We could host this on our website, and it could be a podcast that people could download and listen to while they exercise or go for a walk. And so I wish I had the link to this, or like the Wayback Machine in Google, but I created the first Michigan news podcast for a CBS station. Nobody else was doing it. Almost nobody knew what it was, but I made it. That was before Apple was, Apple Podcast was anything, right? So it was just basically going to be an audio file on the internet, but I did it. So that was my first real experience. Now, fast forward several years later, I got into marketing. I worked for different marketing agencies and so forth. Didn't really do anything. I wanted to launch podcasts because I knew about it, but nobody ever kind of bought into it. So yeah, 2018 was my real like foray into I'm doing this. And since then, like we can talk about what I've done since, but like, yeah, so to answer your question, not a ton of experience, but some.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's, you are so smooth behind the mic that it's like, it seems like this was a natural kind of thing for you to get into.
My wife says I talk too much, so maybe that's all it is. I don't know.
Let's go back to your humble beginnings, a little bit, not a little bit deeper than that, but, I'm curious about when you were starting out, the challenges that you encountered and really, how you broke through those.
Sure. Yeah. Gosh, where do I start with the challenges? And I don't know if I can stop with them. It is an amazingly rewarding endeavor, this podcasting thing, but it is very challenging. A couple of the challenges I've faced early on, the planning, right? Where do I even go? What do I do? How do I launch this? And so I was very fortunate to have a couple of friends that helped me out. One guy named Jamie J, who's a podcaster and owns a business. Jamie is amazing. He helped give me some content as far as like launching it, how to drum up some support among my own personal email list. Ask people, do you want to be on my podcast launch team? They're like, what's that? And then, and of course, back then, that whole idea was to try to get Apple to recognize this big growth and get put on like the up and coming list. Of course, we all realize that doesn't really happen anymore. It's Apple anyway, the evil juggernaut, right? But so that was hard, figuring out how to launch, some of that tactical stuff. And then the other thing was planning out who it was that I was going to interview, and then having the confidence to say, I'm going to do this. And again, I think the key for me then was recognizing, for me, it was seasons, number one. So I knew that my first couple of seasons were going to be, writers, and then I was going to be video creators. And I knew that I had some people in that, or maybe it was writers and then marketing. I don't know, whatever the order was. It's been so long. I knew I had people in there that I could count on, right? And I knew that I had kind of some, I'd say, big names in the space. So one of the seasons with marketing and writers, between those two seasons, I talked to like Dan Miller, 48 Days to the Work You Love, Marcus Sheridan, author of They Ask, You Answer, a big marketing guy, David Meerman Scott, another big marketing guy, Rand Fishkin, the founder of Moz, who then connected me with his partner, his wife, Geraldine DeReuter, who's an author, the Everywhereist. And so I had this early success of great guests. And then from there, it was kind of easy to just like ask. Mm-hmm. And so those are my biggest challenges. And I have a secret for guests too. If you want to, you can ask me that if you want to, but anyway.
Yes. You can't not say that and not say anything about it. So let's go into that can of worms.
Yeah. So I want to make sure I was just taking the monologue from you, James. So I decided that I wanted to go really big, and I watch a television show on network TV called A Million Little Things. It's on ABC TV. And the creator of the show, DJ Nash, is pretty active on Twitter and very reachable on Twitter. And my wife said to me one day, you have the Storytellers podcast. Why not ask DJ to be on it? And I was like, yeah, right. Why not? Literally just tweeted at him, hey, DJ, I've got the show. I'd love to interview you at some point. Like, if you're open to that, tell me who your folks are. I'm happy to connect with them, whatever. And he answered me. I ended up working through his PR folks through the Disney company or whatever. So like the secret is just ask. Mm-hmm. Now, it's not always a yes. I produced a show for a nonprofit. The show is called I'm Not in an Abusive Relationship. And we just released our 100th episode pretty recently. And I wanted that episode to be an interview with the singer Carrie Underwood, because she talks about domestic violence in a couple of her songs, right? And so I thought, man, if I can get that be our 100th episode, that'd be great. And so I knew that I had a mild connection to her, and that person said, I really can't. It's above my pay grade. I don't really know her that well. Okay, no problem. I don't want to burn that bridge. So I just reached out to her on Instagram, and I've heard nothing. So, if anybody knows Carrie, hook her up with me. But yeah, so sometimes it's a no, and that's okay. Or it's an ignore, and like, okay, well, I'm just going to move on. I'm going to ask twice, and then I'm going to move on. Yeah. But you never know if you don't ask, right?
That's right. Yeah. And, it's a no for now.
Yep.
It may still happen. So, you got to go after it too. This conversation that we're having was a direct result of me asking our Facebook group who can come on a show that has not been in existence yet, who's willing to do that. Dan Moyle, thank you for coming on the show that is not in existence yet. As of this recording, a week from now, I will have episodes finally published. But let's talk a little bit about growing podcasts and promoting. What's your what kind of advice would you give somebody who's starting out?
So promotion is not easy. Number one, that's really hard. It's hard to not come off as self-promotional. It's hard to not come off as kind of like all you do is talk about your podcast. What I would say is just like any marketing, and I'm not a marketing professional. My day job is with a marketing agency. I've been doing marketing for over 10 years now. So like, this is my thing. And promoting your podcast is a lot like just plain marketing. Don't be gross. Don't just tell people all about you, right? Help solve questions. I've spent time in social media. When people have questions about marketing, I might give them a link to my podcast. I go into podcast groups, and when people say, self-promotion Sunday or whatever it is, right? Like, go ahead and put it there. The problem is people probably won't click on it because they're all doing the same thing. But just kind of getting your word out there a little bit. And then the biggest thing is just, I said, answering questions, having conversations, right? Of course, as we're recording this, the COVID-19 pandemic is hopefully beginning to wane as people get vaccinated, et cetera. In-person gatherings might be a great way to find promotion opportunities, whether it's someplace like Podfest or Podcast Movement, or it's like the gathering of your niche that you're in and producing a podcast for. Go talk to those folks, right? So for instance, the Abusive Relationship podcast, if we want to reach supporters and donors, and we want to reach people who are in abusive relationships, and then we want to reach other nonprofits just to get the word out, any of those places where those people are hanging out and we can just have conversations, we're going to do that. And so those are the biggest things. And then the end all be all, in my opinion, is an email list. You have to build your email list. Social media is rented land. Don't build your house on rented land. Build it on your own website and your own email list. So anything you can do to connect with people there and encourage them to sign up for that list. One of my friends, Christopher Lockhead, who's an author and a marketing guy, he has a couple podcasts on marketing, and then also Follow Your Different. He has released this newsletter idea for him and for his brand about being a category pirate. He's all about being the category king or queen. And so then he sent us the category pirates, and Christopher is funny. Be warned, he swears a lot, which is cool. I do too sometimes, but just be warned. But Christopher is creating this newsletter of people who want to be category pirates, entrepreneurs, and that kind of thing. I subscribe to a couple other other newsletters. Ann Handley, Scott Monty, Mitch Joel, Cole Hauser, Honey Copy. He's amazing. So like having that connection with people so you can give your episodes to them, and then also, upsell or whatever you're doing. Build that email list is the other big thing.
Yeah, I'm curious about that. I've heard build your email list in relationship to podcasting. The kind of gap for me is how do you get people to join your mailing list without being so cringe? I mean, you were just talking about like, don't just go into Facebook groups and like talk about yourself. You want to provide value. You want to, be helpful.
It's walking that fine line between being helpful and being self-promotional, right? I wish I had a great answer for that and just an easy, like, here's what you do.
Yeah.
It's just walking that line though.
Come on, Dan, you're holding back. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. If I had that secret, I'd be on the beach somewhere just chilling, right? Like my email list is doing its work. I think the thing is, again, answering those questions, bringing the value. And then when people say, thank you, yep, no problem. By the way, you can sign up for my email list here anytime and get those answers anytime. Mm-hmm. Right? Like that's an okay thing to do, I think. Walking in and just interrupting people in the middle of a conversation, which is what social media is, just saying, hey, I have an email newsletter. Like, yeah, I don't care. Give them that value first. And then very tactical, whatever. Very, very practically maybe is what it is. Have an opportunity on your website to sign up for it. Don't hide it, right? Put that call to action up in your main header. Mm-hmm. Sign up for our newsletter. Right? Put it at the bottom in the footer, sign up for our newsletter, put it at the end of every podcast episode. Have that call to action on your website. And also as you speak, close out every episode with, and don't forget to sign up for our newsletter on our website, yourdomain.com, et cetera, et cetera. Right? Okay.
That's definitely, practical advice right there. I mean, and Dan, I'm remembering now, you're an inbound marketer. And so this is not just coming out of the ether. I mean, this is like, years of a decade of experience of being an inbound marketer. So, that's gold that you're given to us right there. I do want to talk about an episode or two. Actually, I listened to a couple of episodes from Storytellers Network. I listened to your pilot episode for introducing the Storytellers Network. I'm trying to put a trailer together at as of this recording, so I was looking for inspiration there. It's a great example of how are you so natural with your podcasting voice? For me, I'm struggling with, I'm reading off of a script and I'm trying to sound natural, and that sounds like I'm trying to sound natural. What kind of advice would you give around that?
First, let me encourage you, James. You do sound natural. You are not coming off to me as the guest, as somebody reading a script. Like, you can have notes, and I appreciate that. When I'm the host, I have notes. I might even have questions in front of me, but you, so let me encourage you, have faith in yourself. You don't sound nearly as bad as what you think you do. Okay. And that goes to any listener that's starting a podcast. So the other thing is years of experience. I've been doing this camera work, microphone work for a good solid 10 years now. When I got into marketing, it's fun. I'm a storyteller, so forgive me. When I got into marketing, I went from TV newsroom, where I was the writer, never in front of the camera, to working in marketing. And I said to my bosses, I want to do video for us. I want to create videos to answer questions and blah, 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 and do like an interview style. And they were like, oh yeah, great. Awesome. Buy the camera, buy the lights, which, by the way, coming from a newsroom where I never got any money ever, was huge. Like, wow. Anyway. So I said, okay, great. I'm going to buy that stuff. Now who's going to be the host? And they looked at me and said, well, you. And I said, y'all, no, I have a face for radio and a voice for newspaper. You're not putting me in front of a camera. And they said, no, Dan, you'll be fine. So I said, okay, I began to do it. And over a couple of years, lots of bad videos, I became more comfortable in front of the camera. I'm okay making mistakes. I grew up as a stutterer. And so I have to really concentrate sometimes on how I speak and slow down a little bit. So all of that comes into, I just kind of play and have fun, and I get more comfortable. Since then, and then also, like, when I was making those videos for the mortgage company that I worked at, I am not a mortgage loan officer by any means, but I became the expert. I used to do a thing called 60-second mortgage tips, and I would write a script, and I would have a teleprompter in front of me, and I would do this thing where I'd be like, and now it's time for your 60-second mortgage tip. And I would have fun with it and be a little bit cheesy. Then I would give actual advice and just get comfortable doing that. And then hearing the sound of your own voice, everybody hates it at first, but eventually I think some of us get used to it. And like, I don't even hear that's my voice anymore.
Just doing it. Got it. Yeah.
And know that it's okay if you suck at first. We all do.
Yeah. Somebody was I was doing an interview recently, a couple of interviews, and they mentioned Joe Rogan's early episodes, as recommendations to, like, refer to those. He had to start somewhere. They're not that great. So, we all start somewhere.
I don't know if his new ones are even that great, but anyway, that's just me.
I also did listen to a season 2 episode. That was your podcasting season, actually. And I listened to it for obvious reasons, right? Because we're putting podcasts together here. But it was the Dave Jackson School of Podcasting episode. Yeah. I mean, right. Of course, again, I'm like, just kind of like, how can I get, Dan Moyle's knowledge into my skull, right? So great episode. The stories and tips, fantastic. I mean, the interview episode went fantastic. What I'm really getting at right now is how, I mean, I think you touched on it a little bit. How do you prepare for your interviews? How do you go in and, talk to people like this? You script it, outline it. I'm going to shut up now.
Yeah, no, great question. Great question, James. So the two questions I heard is, how do you prepare? And then how do you have those conversations? Right. So number one, I prepare, tactically, I prepare by looking them up, look at their social media. If they have a book, I'm going to try to read at least some of the book. Full disclosure, I don't read every single page of their books. Oftentimes I'll read a chapter or two. I'll skim to the middle, look for some stuff. I'll try and find like a cool story to dig out. But I don't always read every single book. I have a friend who has a podcast called the Marketing Book Podcast, Douglas Burdett, and he reads every single book that he interviews. It's insane. Anyway, that's not me, but I read at least some of their stuff. I look at, watch a video or two of theirs. If they do video, I just get to know them through their content. And then I get to know them through the interview. right? I think that's my biggest desire, is to get to know people. I love connecting with people and hearing their stories, whether that's for the Storytellers Network or something else that I'm doing, or just sitting down and having a beer with somebody. I just want to hear your story. And I think that I went through some coaching one time, and my superpower is curiosity. That was what all my coaching came out of. My superpower is my curiosity. And I just want to know questions. So there's that. Now, the tactical side of things. Do I script it? Do I go in with questions? Yes, I do. I go in with my starter questions. I always have an opening question or two, and then I always have my closing question. And I don't know if that's maybe cliche. Everybody's like, yeah, I'm dating myself here. I'm always like, here's your Barbara Walters moment, right? Like, I want to get to that really cool question at the end, because that's the fun part. But I love that. And so I always end with that, with a hook in some way, and on every show that I do, or at least I try to anyway. But in the meantime, in the in-between time, it's paying attention. It's active listening. Oh, you said this. Well, what about that? I'll take notes. I'm looking down. If they're talking, I'm looking down, taking some notes. And I always warn everybody, if I'm looking down, I'm taking notes. So I'm not playing, Crossy Road or something. Right? But then it's just a matter of listening to what they said. And if it fits into my next question that I want, I'll work that in. If not, I'll just chuck the script and let's just talk.
So I was disappointed to learn that Storytellers Network ended May of 2020. And I'm curious to know, is that going to come back, or you've laid it to bed forever?
Man, nothing's forever.
Okay.
I enjoyed it so much. And it's funny because talking about it with you really makes me miss it. Part of why I shut it down, I got through 10 seasons, 125 episodes. I enjoyed the heck out of myself, but it had become a chore. I used to edit everything. I would pre-produce, do the research, reach out to people, have conversations back and forth about scheduling, do the actual interview, edit it, produce it, get it ready for the web, and then promote it. I did everything. I couldn't afford anybody else. It's just a hobby, right? So I couldn't afford production or anything else. And so it became a chore, and I was like, I'm just not enjoying this. Put it to bed for a while. I'm doing some other things now. I have another podcast that I co-host and co-produce with my one of my partners. I'm a co-host on a show with a guy who started a podcast last year and is doing what's called the Anti-Racism Podcast. I'm learning a ton from that one. And then I also produce the one for the nonprofit, I'm Not in an Abusive Relationship. So like, there's a lot kind of going on. And that is, by the way, it's not all. I do freelance podcasting, some B2B podcasting. So I'm a host for hire, so to speak. So like, I love podcasting. So I think I'd like to bring it back at some point. I don't know exactly when, but I think it'd be fun to go back and interview people who tell stories and ask them new questions.
I was going to ask you what you're up to, and you just summed it up right there. What else you're up to? I'm like floored. I mean, it's you've got a lot of irons in the podcasting fire.
I love it.
I'm trying to pick a show that you're currently involved with right now. Like, I Am Not in an Abusive Relationship. Let's talk about that one, because that seems to be an active podcast that you're, into, you're passionate about. I think you're actively producing shows as well. What is it that you want people to get out of that podcast? Why should they listen to that show in particular?
Help and hope. When I pitched the idea for the show, I was an incoming board member prospect. Wasn't even yet a board member. I talked to the board president at the time and the executive director of the organization. We call it affectionately DASIS. It's Domestic and Sexual Abuse Services. So the president and the executive director, we met for lunch to interview me as a possible board member. And I said, hey, I have this idea. I had gone to an event that they had hosted, and they had a survivor speak, and she kept saying the phrase, quite literally, I would tell myself I'm not in an abusive relationship, but then I would see this, whatever, right? And I thought, man, if we could share stories of survivors and how they got out, how they've survived, what they're doing now, and offer that hope, that'd be amazing. But then I also want people to recognize that oftentimes victims in the moment and survivors eventually tell themselves that they're not in an abusive relationship. This is just how it is for me or whatever. Right. And so I thought that title would be pretty compelling. And I didn't want to do only survivor stories because that gets really heavy. So we sprinkle in survivor stories, and then a lot of interviews on helping people. Here are tactics. Here, if it's Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month, how do you, as a parent, recognize if your teen's in an abusive relationship? As a teenager, how do you recognize it? What are some red flags? And so we'll have all kinds of content on that. And I think that's the biggest thing, is that how do you find hope and help in this really dark situation? And then I'd like to break down the shame and the guilt and this aura that we have around things like domestic violence and sexual abuse, and say, let's talk about it. It may not be this fun charity, where you can talk about it easily if you're helping, veterans, or you're fighting cancer. Not that cancer is fun, but like, that's an easy one to talk about, right? We don't want to talk about domestic violence. We don't talk about sexual abuse. And so if I can break down that stigma so we can talk about it and then give to those organizations in your area, like, that's my big goal.
That is wonderful. I mean, what a great way to use your skills and talents and connections to, get that voice heard. That is vital for sure. Let's talk about, let's get into a time machine here regarding that podcast. I mean, a year or two down the road, what are your hopes for that show?
That Carrie has finally said yes.
Yeah.
I think that, my hope for it, a year from now, 2 years from now, is to, we're so close to 100,000 downloads that we'll hit that soon. Beyond that, like the numbers wise, I'd love to hit 500,000 downloads. I would love to have a network see it and have us do something with that. Whether that's a New York Times, documentary special that they do now, right? They just did Framing Britney Spears. Like, they did something like that on this. That'd be amazing. I'd love to have it become a little bit of a revenue machine for DASIS. Because right now, obviously, help and hope is our biggest push, right? Our mission, and also, I want to be able to raise money for this organization. We're a nonprofit. How can I help raise money? Can we create a couple episodes that bring in some funds for us? So those are my biggest hopes. And then also, I want to be able to use it as a launching pad to teach other nonprofits. Here's how you can do this for yourself. And again, no charge. I don't want to make this a business necessarily. I'd love to be able to have a free course or a little bit of just, I'll come speak at your event. Let's talk about how to do this. I'll speak to your board of directors. It's not that difficult. It just takes time and work and a few skills. But it's not, it ain't rocket surgery, as they say.
I'm stealing that, rocket surgery.
Yeah.
Dan, before we wrap things up, I have one last question for you. What is the best thing? I mean, you've got this years of, podcasting experience here. What is the best thing that has happened to you as a result of being involved with podcasting?
Two things come to mind, James. Number one is the impact that I see with my work. When we just talked about the I'm Not in an Abusive Relationship podcast, the stories that I've heard of people calling into our hotline from Canada, emailing from South Africa, coming in from our own community to say, I heard this podcast, this is helping me get out of it. That impact, it chokes me up. So to know that is born from this passion that I have and this skill set that I have. And then the secondary thing is more selfish. The connections. I have been so fortunate to speak with some of the most amazing people in the world of marketing, of podcasting, of television, of, from DJ Nash, who produces a show, who created the show A Million Little Things, to James Breakwell, Exploding Unicorn on Twitter and Instagram. Dude's hilarious and is a big writer. To some of my heroes in marketing, David Meerman Scott. I can consider some of these folks acquaintances, not necessarily friends, but acquaintances. I just had to email them and they remember who I am. And so that network has been tremendous. So
Dan, tell us where people can learn more about you and the shows that you're involved with.
Best place to go is the storytellersnetwork.com. There's a tab there for podcasts. You can see the two podcasts that I have, Storytellers Network and then My America. You can also find information on there about me, air quotes, hiring me. You can see other podcasts that I am involved in and just contact me there. But the storytellersnetwork.com for the website. And of course, social media, I am at Dan Moyle, basically everywhere.
Dan, I'm hoping that I can keep in touch with you, maybe even catch up with you 6 months down the road to see how the podcast I Am Not in an Abusive Relationship is going. Maybe, start talking more about that, get more in depth on that, about that show as well.
James, keep my information, man. Don't lose my number. Let's have conversations. Stay connected on social media. If I can help promote this and other, the listeners as they come in. Like, the cool thing about podcasting is it's a small community, a very giving, very generous community. And I love being a part of it. So yeah, keep my number, man.
Thanks, man. Appreciate that, Dan. The name of the show, the names of the shows are the Storytellers Network and I'm Not in an Abusive Relationship. Dan, thank you so much for coming on. I wish you the best of luck with everything that you're involved with. Thank you for all the insight and advice on this show. I look forward to speaking with you again sometime soon.
A pleasure, James. Thank you.
Thanks again to Dan. Check the show notes for links to learn more about Dan and his shows, The Storytellers Network, My America, and I'm Not in an Abusive Relationship. Please share what you got out of my conversation by leaving a review on podchaser.com. You can find out how to do this in the show notes, and do let me know what you need from me to make this show even better for you. And make sure you follow Podcast Tactics to keep learning more about podcasting in future episodes. Thank you.